Hey fellow creations, it's Elijah here with Holly Hill, and it's time for your weekly sermon preview. Are you a holy priesthood? Identity is so important, to the point that if we forget our identity, or if we have our identity stolen from us, then we really can't do the things that we need to do. You've probably seen it happen with people as they get older. Maybe they have dementia or Alzheimer's. It's a really sad thing to see people begin to forget who they are, to the point that their family and friends would say they're not the same person anymore. They can't do the things that they once did. They can't do the things that they want to do because their identity has been stripped from them. Maybe on a lesser degree, it's really sad when we see someone's identity stolen by someone else, to the point that they can't do the things that they want to do or need to do anymore. This happened with us a few years ago. Shortly after we got married, Katie and I were trying to move into an apartment, and we had to take a background check. Katie didn't pass the background check, and it turns out that they had pulled the wrong identity. The identity of the person that they had pulled was a bad one. They had done all kinds of bad things, all kinds of crimes. And as a result, it put a wrench in our ability to rent an apartment. Of course, Katie didn't do these things. They pulled the identity for someone named Caitlin instead of the identity of Katie. And so there we saw what it might be like to have your identity stolen. It really prevents you from doing the things you want to do or the things that you need to do. Us remembering our identity is so very important. That's why here in 1 Peter chapter 1 and 2, Peter is writing to these Christians that are being tempted to forget their identity. They're scattered all around in Galatia and Asia and Bithynia and all of these places. They're Christians that are scattered around and they're facing persecution. They're kind of out of sorts because they're at the verge of forgetting their identity or caving to the political or social pressure to set aside Jesus, to set aside their Christianity. And so Peter is writing to them to remind them to remain strong and to remember who they are. He says to them in chapter 2, verse 5, he says that they are like living stones being built into a temple. He also says in that verse that they are like a priesthood, a holy priesthood. He also says that they are living sacrifices. He's talking about the Old Testament sacrificial system. He tells them what their new identity in Christ is. Not only are they the temple, not only are they the priests, they're also the sacrifice. This is the new identity that they need to remember. It's the entirety of the Old Testament sacrificial system, something that they could understand. But why is it that they were these things? It's because Jesus was these things. He says in verse 16 of chapter 1, he said, "You be holy, for God is holy." Do the things that God has done. And in chapter 2, verse 4, right before he gets into calling them living stones being built together into a temple, and them being high priests, he said, Jesus was the living stone. See, they are to do the things that Jesus did. This is their identity because it was Jesus' identity. Here's the thing that we need to understand as well. When we become a Christian, when we give our lives to Jesus, his identity becomes our identity. Jesus was the temple of God when he came down to this earth. First, in John chapter 1, the first chapter of John, verse 14, it says, "The glory of God came and dwelt among us, became flesh." He was God in the flesh, God here. He became the temple of God. He was God's Spirit in our midst. He was the temple. But as we know, he was also our high priest. He was the one who made sacrifices for us, but he also was the sacrifice itself. Jesus showed himself to be the entirety of the Old Testament sacrificial system. Therefore, as a result, we reflect that. And we also become the temple of God today. We become the priests for God today. And we become a living sacrifice for God today. So that's what we're going to talk about this upcoming Sunday. Remembering our identity in Christ, who Jesus was and who we need to be as a result. And we'll look at these three things: the temple, the priesthood, and the sacrifices. And we'll look at three applications of each. You know that I love this, 3 groups of 3. Couldn't be a better sermon structure. But we're going to look at these 3 groups of 3, and we're going to notice, what was the temple all about? And how can that be applied to us if we're the temple today? What were the priests all about? And how can that be applied to us today? And what were the sacrifices all about? And how can that be applied to us today? In other words, we're going to remember our identity in Christ so that we all can become a holy priesthood. We love you all, and we look forward to seeing you this upcoming Sunday, 10 a.m. for Bible class and 11 a.m. for worship. Bye-bye.